Dan Taranto Fieldbook, member of the working group, which is composed of Peter Childs, Bonnie Blackberry.
And Dan, you're going to have to put that microphone right in front of your mouth. And
we got to think out something. This thing's in the way. It's an impediment to be making presentations.
I know, but that's the only way we can hear you.
Oh, come on. This county can afford something better than this. But it's adding to the confusion, and I'll have to second it. And every time someone says that. I came here studying this stuff for a month.
So would you repeat who's the members of your committee?
Okay, Peter Childs, Bonnie Blackberry, Estelle Fennell, and Tom Grover, and myself. Did the best we could in the time we had in the middle of the holidays, and trying to put this thing together. I'm not experienced at doing this, and so I think I have, yes?
You know, I've heard your name for a long time, and could you just enlighten me on, you know, you were in the original 1500 group. Could you enlighten me on what your background is?
My background with regards to what?
The 1500.
With 1500, well, that's what I thought we were directed to do as the working group. I reviewed the tape. I heard 4 of the commissioners say that they wanted to hear from the people that were involved in the genesis of the 1500 section.
And, yeah, how did that come about?
Oh, what, my portfolio? Or
well,
personally?
I don't know, your degrees and everything. Just tell me why you're interested in this and, you know, sort of like what your qualifications are.
My qualifications. Well, I'm a citizen, taxpayer, graduated from high school, have a master's degree in biology. I've served my country with an honorable discharge in the Navy. And all in all, I think I'm a pretty upstanding citizen. Never been convicted of a felony. I've served 2 years on the grand jury, 19 years or 12 years on the board of directors of the State Association of Grand Jurors, which I helped create and develop into a statewide organization that now trains about 1,000 grand jurors per year statewide. And let's see, I've served on a number of committees in this county, starting with what was called at one time in 1974 the United Stand Study Committee, which brought forth the original inquiries into the alternative lifestyles and alternative construction standards of the folks that were leaving the cities to live a more simple lifestyle, less consumptive lifestyle. Building innovative houses, bringing forth the first solar panels, and little people know that the solar panels in California were illegal in the 70s, and building inspectors were running around telling people to tear them off their roofs and such like that. We spent some time trying to correct these ill-conceived rules that provide for more environmentally sound innovations to be allowed to be created in people's backyards, as tinkerers will do, in the interest of improving their living situations. Subsequent to that, I was appointed to the Citizens Advisory Committee to the Housing Element in 1979. 15-member committee composed by the Board of Supervisors, which delivered a housing element that was certified by the state with great accolades. That didn't cost the county much money because we hardly used staff at all. And then I served on the 3 subsequent housing element updates over the 20-year period. All of those housing elements were certified without any lawsuits and without a lot of acrimony like you're currently having with this housing element. After that, I served on your budget task force in the county budget sometime in the 90s. And let's see, the Fire Safety Committee, the Regulations Committee, and a few others I can't recall right now. But I've logged in a lot of time, and I'll match the time I've served up against any of you, including Mary, with regards to contributions to this county's development of... And so I'm a kind of one of those, I got drawn to it like some moth to the flame, and they'll find out what caused it when they do the autopsy someday. But I find collaborating with people to try to resolve problems is rather fascinating undertaking, and dealing with different perspectives and trying to weave those perspectives into a common interest is a challenge and a very invigorating kind of an activity. And I would imagine some of you can relate to that. And I've served probably over half of my life on some kind of a body of that sort. Right now, I'm not on anything, and it's kind of nice. And being away from it, from Humboldt County, after serving so long in the grand jury, I spent 19 years going around the state of California, participating in conferences for grand jurors and training seminars for grand jurors. 10 years a lobbyist in Sacramento, working on grand jury legislation to give the grand jury more clarity in its rules and regulations, to allow it to be more penetrating and appropriate in its undertakings, to help groom government to be more responsive to the needs of their communities. And I could go on probably, but that's probably enough. I was involved when we worked on that first housing element. One of the foremost interests that we had, the first policies that were put into that housing element were policies for public participation. And the whole committee, a 15-member committee, solid committee, that committee met 4 or 5 times a week in subcommittees with full committee meetings for a period of a year and a half. I can't remember, 150 meetings maybe, all told. And we had good attendance. We never failed to get a quorum. And we produced the document with a unanimous, well, we had a couple of minority reports on limited items, but predominantly we worked out the problems at the committee level. Before it got to the Planning Commission, the bugs were pretty much gone. And those documents slid through the Planning Commission, went through the Board of Supervisors, and were passed by the state the first time through. And during the course of working on those housing element, that first housing element in particular, the one that was passed in 1981, during the course of our tenure from 79 through 81, there was the lawsuit threat from the Legal Women Voters that the county had no general plan, hadn't updated it. It was derelict in performing its duty to provide the county with an updated general plan. I find it kind of interesting that somebody had to sue the county to get them to do the general plan that time, and now I understand you have some lawsuits against the process trying to slow it down or stop it. A little bit of a pendulum swing of some sort, and I don't even begin to want to understand that. But there was this qualitative different experience in working with the boards of supervisors and the Planning Commission in those days. For instance, when a person got up to the podium, you had 10 minutes to make your case. There was none of this 3-minute stuff. 3 minutes is just terribly inadequate, and I may be some kind of a pro forma minimum, but it is inadequate and it's offensive, and people are not able to articulate what they have to say in such a short time, and it's kind of rude to cut them off mid-sentence, and I've witnessed that many times. So I'm really puzzled by this because I hear all of the discussion about this rich public involvement and all these meetings you've had or the staff has had, but I've been doing my own homework and catching up because I did come in a little bit out of the loop, but I've been backfilling my absenteeism with information by people I've been talking to in different parts of the county, and I did visit a couple of the workshops that were put on or the visits to the outlying areas, and I thought they were very poorly done. They whip in there, they flip out their little PowerPoint show. Folks don't really know what's going on. You don't have hardly the time to read halfway through the sheet of PowerPoint on the screen, and they're flipping on. You ask a question that they don't want to answer, and they say they'll get to that later, and they leave before they get to that. And most people, after they've left, wonder, who are those people? What are they doing? What's happening? They didn't understand. Another for instance is that in my exposure here, the hue and cry about people wanting to have your august body visit their communities, that you're planning for them, and that you are the representative of all the people of the county as far as being the Citizens Advisory Committee to service the public participation committee level attitude of that framework plan. But if you really read the framework plan, the idea was to have more of a bottom-up approach to the general plan, and this one's clearly a top-down. It's just too fast, and it's too furious, and people get confused, like I am thoroughly confused right now. Last time I was terribly confused by these comparison charts. Impossible. The average person just cannot walk into the room for the first time and figure those things out. And we worked really hard to get this thing together, to put it into the format, insane as it seems to us, so that you guys can process it, however you've been conditioned to do it that way. But it's very alienating to the public. We went to the hearing that you ventured out all the way to CR, to address the concerns of the people in the rural areas about 2.5 years ago. And on a graduation night of all times, there's maybe 300 people there. It's supposed to be a workshop. It was virtually no give and take. And there wasn't a single scrap of paper distributed giving information to those people that came there. So it just turned into a 3-minute cutoff, next, 3 minutes. And I never saw the minutes, but I didn't ever see any artifact that resulted from that, a particular going out to the rural areas workshop. In the next workshop, which was down in Wedway, the only other time you guys have ventured it out of the stronghold of this building in the city of Eureka was down to Redway in the school auditorium, and there was another 200 or 300 people there, too. And again, not a single scrap of paper, not any information whatsoever to hand out to all those people that were assembled from all over that southern part of the county. This, to me, is a de facto evidence that this process is really not truly concerned with including the input from those folks, or to help educate them so that they can more substantively contribute to the process. It's a perfunctory. It's hollow. It's without meaning. And when people see that, you lose credibility. The public trust, if you could draw a curve and put it on your chart, it would be going downhill at a rather steep rate. This room isn't very full now, and this is supposed to be about public participation tonight. But I think because this has been going on for 10 years, there is a substantial sentiment throughout this county that this process is just untenable. They don't believe in it. It's not part of them. It's something artificial that's being laid over everybody else, and it's so complicated, like just this introductory reaction to these inputs right now, unless you're a professional at coming to these meetings and studying this stuff constantly, there's no way an ordinary person can even understand what you're talking about, let alone keeping up, flipping through this, oh, we go with this, we go with that, we don't want this. How is the community supposed to follow this sort of stuff? There is no consideration for the viewing audience, in my view. And I'm a professional committee guy. I've been doing this stuff virtually all my life. And this is a terribly confusing process. It's just hard to say it any other way. You cannot rationally engage this process and understand what's taking place so that you can, in an informed manner, contribute in a meaningful way. And that's part of what the 1500 section is all about. And back in 1980, when the board decided, after having such a good feedback on how well our Citizens Committee was producing them a housing element for virtually no cost that got accepted and certified without any hang-ups, nothing like what you guys are experiencing with you're still fiddling around with this housing element. You should have been able to do 2-3 of them by now. It's just something really ridiculous about this process. I can't even put my finger on it, but I would suggest that if you were to do some kind of a legitimate survey from an independent, dispassionate, credible body or surveying outfit, and what the feelings of this community are about what you are doing and what this general plan is all about, I think I don't know if you would be surprised. Maybe you already know all of this stuff. But I will assure you that you're not going to be pleased with the results on what they think of your work. And they're very confused by this process. And they don't come because they figure it's pointless. It's hopeless. They can't understand it. I don't know what more to say. But I'm here anyway because I still have a glimmer of hope because of all the work we put into that 1500 section. It was like a year and a half's work. The board appointed the committee. I came prepared to give you a nice historical background, but the way this thing is taken off, it's so, I don't know, it's like a motor that's out of time. All the cylinders aren't firing, but you still keep chugging along and you're belching gas out the exhaust pipe, and you just keep on going because you got to get to wherever it is you're going. But nobody knows, and you smell as you're going by because everybody says, what is this process? Well, anyway, we did. We had a great committee, and we worked hard. We read lots of documents. We had not only the OPR policies and guidelines, HCD's guidelines, the governor's office had its own independent guidelines, and a number of examples of other public participation programs around the state in various communities, and selected from them, cherry-picked from them, the best that we could find, and put all that stuff into the 1500 section. The 1500 section was first revealed after the committee did its work in the form of the citizens' participation. Let's see, did I have it here? I did have it, but now I forgot where I put it. You've seen the handbook. There's actually two handbooks. Now, this is a different thing. This is part of the history thing. I just pulled out. I got a ream on the CPAC committee. It's about that big. So I went cherry picking through to give you a few highlights of what happened way back then. But I don't know if you're truly interested. I'm not sure what that is either. Another handbook. You've seen it. It's around. Yeah, no, you can have it. I had a nicer one to give you, but that one's good enough. If you read that, I'm sure you'll know more than when you started to read it. But the effort there is to give history to the people in the handbook. So somebody that just the new citizen in town and wants to understand the planning process, you'd read through that, you would see the history of planning in California, when the first planning laws were brought in, and then the sophistication of those planning laws over time, and up to the present time, and so that people could kind of like a tutorial to bring them up to speed with what the planning process was all about. Just like you all should be getting when you become planning commissioner, some kind of an orientation, some kind of a context in which your role in this panel is intended to fulfill. And then beyond that, we talked about different approaches. We even considered the idea of splitting the planning commission or having a second planning commission, if that would not be more efficient. So you'd have one body that was focusing on the advanced planning or the minutia of the more refined touches you have to add to the general plan on a regular basis. And then the regular planning commission could move ahead and do the permit processing and the subdivisions and the development kinds of stuff. And that would allow those things to move along more expeditiously so they didn't cost so much and that we might actually get some real affordable housing in the county. But because of the cumbersome nature of the process, that all kind of works against the idea of producing affordable housing. So we really were trying to do problem solving. And we had, the county administrative office was involved. Let's see, we have them here. Is it in this one? Ah, it's in this one. I know that because I just put it together this morning. Okay, we had somebody from two planning commissioners, a member from the Parks and Recreations Commission, two coastal Citizen Advisory Committee members, of which Mary was one of them, a Jacoby Creek Advisory Committee person, the first community advisory committee in the county, and they had the first experience of how that worked. I think it worked very well for the Jacoby Creek watershed area. Two members from the Citizens Advisory Committee, because we were very fresh in delving into public participation in that particular project, and we got high accolades, and I can provide you evidence of that. The local agency formation commission, the Hydesville Water District, and the 5 cities circuit team all contributed members to this committee. And we produced that first document, and then that document was submitted to the Planning Commission, reviewed by the Planning Commission. Public hearings were held. The Planning Commission made some changes and recommendations on it, went on to the Board of Supervisors. The supervisors did the same thing, reviewed it, took testimony, made some changes, and then the final product out of the Board of Supervisors was the second version of the Citizens Handbook, which is the one that you have here today. And this was used quite successfully in getting that other general plan adopted, helped get that general plan adopted, the community informed. We didn't have all this confusion that you've got now. It was not a confusing process like this at all. It was much more straightforward. And like I say, people were allowed 10 minutes to make their case, not cut off at 3, a little light thing, that the ridiculous little thing you got up there. I mean, you're watching the light more than you're listening to the people speaking, I suspect, much of the time. And and so when I come back to this after many years of doing other things, I hear that the general plan, they've taken out the public participation stuff. So, or no, I was following the housing element. That's right. I came before this body almost 3 years ago, about 2.5, 2 3/4 years ago, because I had looked at a copy of the draft general plan and I saw that all of the public participation policy that we had worked on so hard 30 years ago now, that was so successful for us and the subsequent housing elements that we were able to produce without the lawsuits and the delays and the rejections from the state, had been removed from the housing element. And so I brought that to you guys and said, what happened to the public participation policy in the housing element? And the answer was, oh, it's all been removed and put into the general plan update document. So I went over to get the general plan update document, which incidentally cost us about $20. I have to show you this. For the price of one of those GPUs, you can produce 400 of these. That's public education. $20 for a document is preventing public participation. But anyway, I look in the GPU, and what's in the GPU? One little couple of sentences, a platitude, if anything, for public participation. I mean, the document had been cleansed of all reference to public participation. And I was very disturbed by that. And then I went before the Board of Supervisors with that problem. I went to the League. I went to other organizations that say, do you realize what's taking place here? They're stripping these documents of the public's right to participate in the planning process. We were here, let's see, 2.5 years ago. It was August of 79, or 89, 2009. Whew, I'm getting old. But we got the deer in the headlights look from the board. They didn't know what we were talking about. I prepared this chart, and you might have saw it. I reused it a couple of times, ended up sending a letter to HCD because there was no responsiveness from the board, the commission, the staff, just being ignored. No explanation why all this policy had been removed. I couldn't find any evidence that there had been any processing of any general plan amendments to cause that policy to be removed. It was just removed. It was just slipped through the crack. By what process, I don't know, but my curiosity has compelled me to continue to find out to this point, to this date. I don't know what to say, but then I look. And I started telling people your rights to participate in the planning process are being taken out of the document. Now, we've been doing the best we can, those of us that have been trying to bring attention to the community about this matter. And in here lately, like just most recently at the 11th hour, the staff appears to have suddenly realized that they had overlooked carrying that policy over and has been quite willing to reincorporate quite a bit of it. And I'm very grateful for that. But I would say that the timing is pretty peculiar because the last time we did the planning process, the very first thing when the board decided they were going to initiate a general plan update or rewrite or whatever they called it then, under the pressure of the League of Women Voters lawsuit, on that very same day, they emphasized the importance of public participation, and they emphasized that we need to have a citizens advisory committee of people that are experienced in working with citizens advisory bodies to come and together to put together the best ideas that they could come up with to submit to your body and their body to create a citizens program that was very much embracing what is the will of the people of this county. And that's what they really did do. And that last general plan, it was developed in like lightning speed compared to what's going on with this process. And it was adopted, and I don't recall any lawsuits about that or any saber-rattling about lawsuits, because the people felt that they actually had a chance to speak to you and that you would listen and take into account what they had to say. And I'll have to say, I think those folks that were serving as commissioners and boards of supervisors in those days really were listening quite a bit more. And then possibly you can't listen so carefully now because this process is so convoluted and complex that you got to shift gears every couple of hours. You're doing this element, you're doing that element. How do you keep your focus on any one thing when you're just hopping from lily pad to lily pad, doing a little of this, a little of that? I kind of get the feeling of a strategy of divide and conquer. You're so divided and spread out in your attention that you can't really concentrate your collective focus on one thing for long enough to really thoroughly understand it. I've heard all of you, or many of you, over the few times that I've come say, you're confused too. Well, if you're confused, what do you think folks like this out here are? We're totally confused. And if you follow the 1500 section, we wouldn't be confused because you were supposed to educate the public, encourage them to, in order to encourage them and motivate them to be involved in this process. And what the experience is very off-putting, very confusing, just so tangled up that you just can't keep up with it. You can't embrace it. You can't get your arms around it. It's going this way, and then it's going that way. And it's just confusing as hell. I don't see how you could disagree with that observation. And yet, you keep trudging on in this very incredibly difficult process. I can't imagine a county having anything more difficult than what you guys are doing. And you're doing a lot of the minutia that could easily be taken care of by citizens advisory committees, but there's obviously a predisposition in the unofficial decision-making process around here that does not care to engage the citizen on that direct of a level of giving them some authority and maybe a little bit of prestige to dedicate their time at no cost to the county generally. I'm sure you guys get a little per diem of some sort, but the citizens advisory committees don't. They do it because they feel good about contributing to their community. They're giving something back, they're being involved, they're being engaged, and that the product has a part of them in it. But the product you guys are working on has very little of the public in it at that very fundamental level that we were working at when we did the framework plan and the housing element over and over again. It was always open, and when people came in, there was no time limits. We wanted to get a real thorough piece of information. So I don't know if I'm going over my time, but that's where my credentials come from. I'm very, very much, I served in the military, and I became during Vietnam, and I was also in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I know about people that give up their lives to protect our society, our democracy. And democracy is sacred. And the initial phases of this planning process strip the democracy right out of the planning process. And we're here to try to get it back in before it's too late. And that's why I'm here. I would rather not be here. I think I've served my county thoroughly. And it's really shocking to me that we can have a general plan that's supposed to be of constitutional authority that can be just cavalierly stripped of things that some people just don't like without going through the proper due process of submitting their proposal to remove the public participation from a document, put it out in the open forum, let people know that the discussion is about to be had and discuss it. It took a year and a half to produce the 1,500 section, and you are reducing to like a meeting and a half now you're recovering it, but for lack of that bit of a cave-in, we would be fighting to get that material back in. But I'm not sure what the inspiration was, but I'm grateful for it. And I don't care to dig into the motives for removing it in the first place, but it is sad that it's being put in at the last minute, at the tail end of this process, when it's not going to have any real play in the work that you're doing. And so the quality of your work is going to be substantially lessened by that. It doesn't really have the sweat and the passion of the public involved in it like the framework plan had. I don't know what else to say, but it's a very serious matter with me, and that's why I'm here, to save that public participation policy, because it's the right of the citizens of Humboldt County to have you make the determination on what the best interest of the community is and what the community values are based on genuine, authentic participation of the public, and not perfunctory little showing up at the, the various service district board meetings of the schools and the poor advertisement, no documents for people to read in advance to know what's coming, to be able to participate in a substantive way. And then listening to these couple of hearings where people went, particularly Redway. There was a lot of wonderful testimony in Redway, but the minutes didn't reflect it. The minutes were so cursory is that like nobody really cared about noting. They're just there so they could say they could be there, so that when they come before you, oh, we had 150 meetings, like body counts. So I don't know what more to say. I think that kind of covers it, but we did come here with the intent to sit down at this table, which was suggested at that meeting a month ago, that there was not going to be any staff report. Martha told me that. And then all of a sudden we get this razzle, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, and you're flipping around, and whew, we can't keep up. We don't know what you're doing.
Well, Dan, I asked her, because we had not gotten a response from staff as to how they felt about the report that you gave us last Thursday, or the one that the League of Women Voters or the Humboldt Area Board of Realtors. So I had asked staff to let us know, because we don't have anything written down, what they agree with and what they might disagree with.
Well, it would be nice if they would put that in a document form up there on the thing, so, or even in
I think
advance.
when it's written, it'll be everywhere. It'll be on. It just, it was. They are very overworked, and I asked them to give us a response. So.
Okay, well, that's good, but it would be nice if that was explained clearly, because I think the pitch is to you, but it's not to educate the people that are trying to follow what's going on here. You can't see that screen. This is in the way. The print is too small. Should be up. It should be bigger. We can't follow that. And if you're doing something that people don't have in their hands, we're just sitting there trying to figure out what you're doing. Is it this document? Is it that document? On this page, that page? This is, I mean, it's like a big complicated shell game that just is untenable for even a fairly well-educated person to follow. And I'm a professional committee guy. I've been involved in writing these documents for over 30 years in a committee context. I've done a lot of work just like you guys have done, but I can't follow what's going on here today or the last time, and I've done my best. I spent the better part of this last month trying to prepare for this meeting, but I'm already somewhat disoriented by the way this presentation has been promulgated. It's not promulgated in a user-friendly, public-friendly, transparent way by my standard by any means. A few people in here are following this very well, I can see. But these guys are pros. I mean, they're insiders. They know this process because they're particularly keen on it. But I'll wager you that you can't find more than 200 people in this entire county that are competent to follow what you guys are doing. And that means all the rest of the people don't know what the hell you're doing. And that is a huge problem for the county's credibility, the public trust, and the problems that you're going to have with promulgating whatever the result of this is because people are not going to believe in it like they should. I don't know what percentage, but I will say you're going to have to do that survey. If you really want to know the truth of how well you're doing with regards to involving the public, you need to contract an independent surveyor, someone that is not affiliated with any of the stakeholder groups or the special interest, either the financial interests or the philosophical political interests, but just to find out what is the will of the rank and file people of this county with regards to this process and what faith they have in it, what belief in it, what understanding they have of it. You're going to be really disappointed with the results. And if you're afraid to take that survey, then you know what I'm talking about already. Thank you.
Commissioner Nelson.
I'm Peter Childs from Reynolds, excuse me.
Let me talk.
Oh, you.
I'm not done with them. First of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me the history. Second of all, I'd like to point out that you went over your 3 minutes.
Yeah, I was watching that thing, and when you're not looking, I'm going to come in here and paint over it. But
And the third thing, I would like to know, I'm a very sort of practical, pragmatic kind of person. Have you read, what we're looking at here, and do you agree with the current revisions which have gotten most of the 1,500 back in?
I do.
And if you do or don't, what do you suggest we do differently?
Well, there's some more things can be done. We did, like I say, I think that as distrusting as I've become, that Mr. Gerard and Ms. Spencer did a surprisingly good job of recovering what I considered to be most of the important stuff. They left out some stuff that wasn't all that necessary, and I had no problem with that. And there are a few things that were overlooked that we were going to bring forward. Some of them you did catch. I was pleased to see they were willing to change the may back to a should, and little details like that. But then there's a few more of them. But in the course of reviewing the Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 3, we felt, well, since we're taking the time to get acquainted with this thing, we decided we wanted to review it not only for the completeness of the reintegration of the 1,500 section into the document, which is good. The only problem with the way it was done is horribly confusing. If you set it up next to the framework plan, all of the public participation policy is consolidated into one place, and it's laid out in a very coherent way. But the way it's presented in this document, it's been cut up into pieces and stuck here and stuck there in different pages, mixed in with other topics that aren't related to public participation. And so if you're trying to track what the public participation program is, you've got to look on this page, and then you've got to flip over to that page, and then you've got to go hunting because you can't find anything about public participation in the table of contents or index of any sort. And so it's like a fishing expedition just to find information that you're looking for. So it's very cumbersome document to read. It's not a user-friendly public document. The framework plan is different. The framework plan might be a little more boring, but it's more straightforward. It has only one numbering system from beginning to end. The index is substantially more sophisticated than the one in the GPU. And if you want to find something, you got a pretty good chance you're going to find it and be able to go right to the page, but not possible with the GPU, not doable. And the definitions, words are used without definitions. The definitions, when they're very unclear. It's not a document designed for people to pick up and understand. Now, it is a nice document, and I've had at least one expert reviewer look at the document and found that it's largely a very informative document, and you can learn a lot about Humboldt County by reading it. But if you're trying to navigate it for something specific, like trying to, process an amendment to the plan or something of that sort, it gets considerably more complicated and ambiguous. You go to the framework plan and it's laid out 1, 2, 3, 4, like how to boil an egg. So it's made more understandable by the average citizen, and that was one of the policies in the first housing element, is that the document should be readable by a high school education. That was the goal. This is, the general plan isn't the planning department's document. It doesn't belong to the planning commission or the board either. This is the people's general plan, and it should reflect the will of the people, and that's what you should be trying to determine. What is the will of the people and the community as a whole, in the far reaches as well as close into the center of the urban areas? I don't think they've been doing a very effective job of that, because when I talk to people in the outlying areas, they don't know what the heck's going on. They hear about the meeting that you had after it happened, and a great number of these meetings are not public meetings. They're stakeholder meetings. They're private meetings. They're closed to anybody except who belongs to the particular stakeholder group, and I don't think they're fairly reported as such. And so I think you're getting not necessarily a clear picture of what all these meetings are really accomplishing, other than that they're checkpoints on a calendar somewhere. For the few that I've actually visited myself, and of the many people that I've interviewed at this point over the past several years since I started to slowly get into investigating this phenomenon, after having invested so much of my time into this in past years, and also being a pack rat on documents, I've got my own archive of information, so I'm not dependent on the staff for much of the stuff. Matter of fact, I think I have a lot of stuff they don't even have. Like, for instance, the handbook. When I first brought the handbook before the commission, I held it up. And Mary, you said, you turned to the staff, well, what about that, staff? And the response was, oh, well, the handbook is now what's called the public guide. That's chapter 2 of the GPU. But you look in that public guide, there's nothing in there to guide you at all. It's just sort of like a catch-all for miscellaneous information that's not informative. It doesn't empower. It doesn't explain. And it doesn't basically encourage people to get engaged in this process. And so as the participation gets littler and littler, the product gets less and less representative of the will of the community. And so you've got a real defective product on your hands, even though you're just about to deliver it to the Board of Supervisors. It's fraught with, I don't know what you can say, deficiencies, I guess the best word I can use. And that's sad, because people are not going to believe in it. They're going to be turned off to it. And you don't have the buy-in in the document that you get when you have more community committees where people, and then we got a lot of talented people in this county, and they would like to contribute. I've dealt with grand jurors now for over 20 years, and they're also people that serve on committees. They like to contribute, and they have the time. They can afford to spend the time. There's a lot of seniors living older that want to have something to do, and they have lots of life's experience. They're lawyers, they're accountants, they're school teachers, book writers. There's all kinds of people that are willing to contribute their time to this. And if you really, especially now with the diminishing finances, to support these kinds of activities, you shouldn't be alienating the people of your community. You should be encouraging them to come on down and contribute some of their energy to help you do what you're doing, and give them an assignment, Go find some information out so that you can get it from, you're getting all your information from one source. That's risky business by any kind of perspective. You need a multiplicity of genuine, credible sources for your information to balance out. And that's another thing committees do. They give you a balance to the staff. The staff have a bias too. just like most stakeholder groups. But for lack of that balance, you, I think, are getting overly influenced by a staff perspective that's not so representative of the community. And you're pushing along and very dependent on the staff, but you have only the stakeholder groups to give you that balance, and they're kind of divided and factionalized, and so you don't have the continuity of a good, stable advisory committee, which if you do a good job, and that's where the burden on developing good advisory committees come from, is it's your job to pick people that are, and put them on a committee and compose a well-balanced committee that has a reasonable cross-section of the community on it. So if anybody looks at that committee, they can see somebody on that committee that represents their point of view. And then, you know, if you put together good committees, you're going to get good products. But if you put goofy committees together based on the political alignments and stuff, you're going to get, you know, distorted advice because people are using the opportunity to influence things to favor their, you know, their various their origins of interest. You do good committees, you'll get good products, you'll save money, and you'll get a community buy-in to what you're doing, and people will appreciate your work a hell of a lot more, and your product is going to be vastly superior than I think you're apt to get with the current process. Any other questions? I can try to answer, or are we going to eventually get to some of the other stuff in this chart that we're?
Well, Dan, first of all, we'd like to hear from everybody that came here to speak to us tonight. So.
All right. I don't mean to be taking too much time, but I did try to sit down, and you called me back. So.